Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing something kind of nerdy. We're going to be taking a look at creating an IoT VLAN that is Apple HomeKit friendly on the Ubiquiti Unifi platform. Now, I've seen several tutorials and YouTube videos out there done by networking experts on setting up IoT VLANs and firewall rules. However, I didn't see any that specifically covered what you needed to make the IoT VLAN work well in an Apple home smart home. I finally figured out how to configure it, and I decided to share my findings with you. Now, keep in mind, I'm not an IT or cybersecurity expert, and I'm just sharing with you what worked well for me, so hopefully it will help you or work well for you as well. Feel free to tweak anything that I do or show to fit your specific needs. Now, this is also timely because Ubiquiti just rolled out their latest version of their networking software, which is version 9 on the Unifi platform. And with it, you have an option of updating your firewall rules to their new zone-based firewall architecture. And I've seen many networking professionals out there excited about this, and it does make things easier and more visual. So let's answer the first question you probably have, and that is, what is an IoT VLAN? And why would I need one? So let's break it down. What's IoT stand for first? IoT stands for Internet of Things. I don't know where that name came from, but it's basically, it refers to a category of all devices that are out there that connect to your network that aren't your laptop or aren't your iPad or aren't your phone. So in other words, things like this smart plug from Maris. It's Wi-Fi connected. It works directly in HomeKit, so it's got a little HomeKit code there to scan it with. And once you set it up, you can control it via HomeKit, obviously, and you can control it in the Maris app, turn it on, turn it off, create automation, schedule, so forth and so on. And you can control each plug. Great. What I don't want is, and what you shouldn't want, is you shouldn't want this plug ever to talk to anything else. It shouldn't be talking to your network servers, your NAS, your laptop, any other devices on your network, because it has a very specific purpose. It connects to Wi-Fi only so it can be controlled and maybe get updates. That's it. Shouldn't touch anything else. I'll give you two more examples. I have a Peloton bike for fitness, and the Peloton bike has a nice, big, beautiful screen on it, and therefore it can stream classes that you can take on the bike over the internet. It gets firmware updates too from time to time. So I don't ever need the bike or its tablet to connect or work with anything else. It basically needs to stream its content down, and that's pretty much it. My car gets software updates now over the air. And again, it needs to connect to Wi-Fi to get those updates, but it shouldn't be talking to anything else on my network. So IoT is those category of devices like that. You might have a smart scale, you might have smart speakers, you might have these little assistants from Google and Amazon that just basically give you information. Those are all IoT devices. Now, VLAN, so when you get your router from your ISP or you bought a separate router, it came with a network. They all have a network, and that's basically everything's on that network. A VLAN is a virtual LAN or virtual local area network. And that VLAN, you can configure, if your platform supports it, which of course Unifi does, you can configure as many VLANs as you want to separate that traffic and for security purposes. So we can create an IoT virtual network that contains all of our IoT devices and does not let them talk to the rest of our network, but does let them talk back and forth to the internet. That's the whole point of this. So it's for two reasons. One, I think we kind of covered that, security, meaning I don't need those devices talking to my important devices. And two, performance. So just also separating things out tends to let you not only tweak the performance, but let you see what's really pulling down a lot of data or whatever on your network without it taking necessarily resources away from your important devices, or let's call those trusted devices. All right, so that's kind of what they are and why you would need one. Now, in this particular segment, I'm going to be doing at least three things. we're going to be creating networks, which are VLANs. We're going to create some firewall. And if you hear me say firewire, that shows my age, but sometimes I'll mix up the words. Firewire. Firewire is a whole different thing. But firewall rules to manage those networks and then block off what can talk to what. And also, last but not least, we're going to create some Wi-Fi networks as well. Because I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know if you're setting up your Unifi network for the first time. I don't know if you had an existing network on some other device and you basically just set up your Unifi equipment with the same Wi-Fi name and password, so everything connected, which is what we most of us do. Or you've already got everything set up and you're just trying to create your firewall rules. So wherever you are in that process, you could be anywhere in between. I'm just going to walk you through it from scratch, and then you apply whatever you need to apply to your own situation. Now, I say I'm going to walk you through it from scratch. What does that mean? I have all this already set up on my network, but thankfully, I had an extra Unifi Cloud Gateway that I was testing. And that Cloud Gateway, I just set it up out of the box for this particular recording so that we can see it from scratch. So we can see me set up all of these things from scratch. So with that said, let's jump right in. So here it is. I'm logged into my management console for the Cloud Gateway Max here. And the Cloud Gateway Max is connected to my regular network. So these IP addresses don't really mean anything to you. All right, next, I'm going to go in and we're going to go to settings. And when I go to settings, first place we're going to go is networks. Now, by default, you have a default network. And this is just because, Unifi doesn't, or Ubiquiti doesn't know what you want to call your Unifi network. So it just calls it default. And one of the first things right off the bat is that I always wanted to rename this, and I found out that it was hard to do and whatever, and I'm not sure when along the way they just simply let you click on it and rename it. But I was pretty surprised by that recently, that you can just go in and rename it now, and you should have always been able to. So let's call it, we're going to call this one Trusted. Now this will all make sense in a minute. I'm going to, on my Trusted network, by the way, I'm going to do, which was my default network, I'm also going to turn on something else that's helpful for HomeKit users. So I'm going to go to manual instead of automatic, and I'm going to turn on this one thing. It's called IGMP snooping. And by the way, if you ever want to know what any of these are, just make sure you just hover over the I, and it will explain what it is. So it says it automatically optimizes and reduces multicast traffic on the network by only forwarding it to the ports where the receivers are connected. So why would I turn this on if it wasn't on by default? Because in an Apple Home scenario, thread-based devices like this and matter-based devices like this. Now, multicast DNS should already be on. This is what things like Apple AirPlay uses. So, so you would want that on too. And so forwards multicast traffic between the selected networks so that IoT devices, see, they even use IoT, can discover and communicate with each other when connected. So that is on by default, but you want to definitely turn on the IGMP snooping as well if you don't already have that on, if you're in an Apple Home environment. So now we'll apply that. And now we have our first network, which you already had. It was called default. Now it's called Trusted. And now we've turned on that one extra feature we should have on. Now, again, I'm not going to go through every single thing here because we're just concentrating this video on a very specific use case, creating our IoT network, Apple Home, and for our firewall. All right, so now, next up, we're going to, if you haven't created one already, just to get it out of the way, we're going to create a guest network. And you might be saying, well, Terry, this is all about IoT and VLANs. Why do I need a guest network? Because for the same reason, if you have a person come over your house and they need to connect to Wi-Fi, they want to hang out on their phone instead of talk with you, kidding. But if you have people that come over your house and they need to access the internet, I don't want to give them my normal Wi-Fi name and password because I don't trust, it's not that I don't trust them. I don't trust their devices. I don't know what malware their device has on it. I don't know what virus their device may have on it. And I don't want that stuff, spreading across my network. So that's why we have a guest network. It's for guests so they can access the internet, but not access anything else. And if they do something on the guest network, it probably won't hurt you. All right, so we're going to create our first new virtual network. So I'm going to create the first. And by the way, I'm doing this under the new Networking 9 software. So if your interface looks different, make sure you go ahead and update your software to the latest version of 9 or higher. All right, so I'm going to create my first new virtual network. You're free to name these whatever you want. So I could call this, let's just call it guest network for the sake of simplicity. All right, so guest network. Now there are some things you want to do. We don't, and notice what it's going to do here. It's going to automatically give it a new broadcast IP address. So my original ones were 192.168.1. It's creating a new one starting with .2. And I'm going to go ahead and say manual because I want to go ahead and do some manual things here. So it's going to give it a VLAN ID. I don't normally mess with these. I just leave it associated with whatever it creates. So your original trusted network is VLAN 1. This one's going to be VLAN 2. That's great. And you'll notice right below this, is this a guest network? Yes, it is. So that way it will do everything it needs to set this up as a guest network and you don't have to worry about it. Now, what does that mean? Here, let's scroll up a little bit. There we go. Oh, let's scroll up a little bit more. There we go. It isolates this network from other virtual networks, not defined as guest networks, using firewall rules on the Unifi gateway. Guests on this network are able to communicate with each other and access the internet. And if there's a landing page, which is a whole other thing you could do with Unifi Wi-Fi networks, in the hotspot manager, guests are also redirected to that authentication, which is kind of cool. Like I have one set up that if a guest connects to my network, it gives them a little welcome message. Hey, welcome to my home. Don't do anything stupid and go ahead and hit connect. So, or you could charge for it or whatever it is you do. All right. So anyway, I'm going to just leave it on guest and that's it. And that's, I don't really need the IGMP snooping because this has nothing to do with HomeKit. But turning it on or off shouldn't hurt your guest network. All right, I'm just gonna leave it off because I don't need it. And then I'm gonna go ahead and hit add. All right, so that will add my first, you created already your first VLAN, it's your guest network, and then of course we have one more to create, and that is going to be our IoT VLAN. So I'm gonna go ahead and create, once again, we're gonna click new virtual network, and that new virtual network is going to be called IoT, I think I like the smaller O, IoT network. And again, you can call these whatever you want. This is the kind of stuff, no one will see these names but you. Where it will matter is when you create your SSIDs. And you can see that is going to create it by default. It's going to give it a 3 instead of a 2. So this will become my next VLAN here. And again, I'm going to go to manual because there's some things I want to do. So it's going to give it the VLAN ID of 3. Great. I'm not going to create a guest network. And I'm not going to create an isolated network. Now you might think, well, Terry, wouldn't an isolated network be what you'd want? Isolates the network from all our virtual networks and using firewall rules and blah, blah, blah. Yes, but we need to do some specific things. This is a kind of a catch-all. We want to do some very specific things to make it work with HomeKit. But there's nothing wrong with doing that. If you just want to create a regular IoT network, that will do it for you. Now, there's also content filtering. I could have covered this on the guest network as well, where you can say that, like you don't want people accessing specific kind of sites, to block malicious, phishing, or adult sites. You could turn that stuff on if you needed it. And we definitely want to turn on the IGMP snooping because this is going to be our VLAN for our HomeKit devices. And yes, we want to allow internet access. And again, that's, I can't remember if that's fairly new or not, that it automatically does that for you. And that's kind of it. I'm not going to go into the rest of the stuff because it's not needed to talk about for this. So I'll hit add, and now we've got phase 1 done. Now we're going to create, where we're going to jump into the network rules. So those are all under the security tab, the firewall rules, I should say. So when I click on security, the first thing that we're going to do, and I may have to pause the video and let this happen because I wanted to show you this. That's why I'm also happy I'm doing this on a new device. Upgrade to the new zone-based firewall. So even upgrading to version 9 of the software does not do this for you automatically. It lets the user decide if they want to upgrade to those new zone-based firewalls, because if you had a bunch of custom firewalls, it needs to convert them over, and you need to make sure you have time in your data if you had a bunch of firewall rules to check them and make sure they all work right. So since this is brand new, I'm just going to go ahead and click update, and we'll let it do its thing. So it's showing me upgrade to the new zone-based firewall. It's giving me kind of an explanation of what that means. Simplifies firewall management by grouping networks and allowing broader policies. Instead of numerous individual firewalls, this reduces complexity and enhances security and eases traffic monitoring management. All the things I already talked about. So all the existing networks will be migrated over to the internal zone. Certain firewall rules might be migrated into multiple policies, and it will do a backup for you just in case you need to revert back. So let's go ahead and do it. All right, so let's see what it did. Let's go in. So for my internal zone, which it created, it put trusted and IoT in it, and it put guest in the guest network in a zone called hotspot. External is your internet. Gateway is your Unifi console or cloud key or whatever it is you're using. VPNs for virtual private networks, and DMZ is the demilitarized zone. So anything if you're basically running a public server and it needs to be basically have no rules to get at it, you can put it. Anyway, that's not for this today. Now, visually, it also gives me all the zones down here. So this is pretty cool. Internal right now is allow all. We're going to make some changes, so that's not going to be the case. External is out to the internet, and it shows me which policies, which things can go out to the internet. Right now, we don't have any extra rules to block anything. So it blocks invalid traffic, and it allows all traffic. And then destination gateway is your MDNS, and allow all traffic. VPN, we don't have any VPN set up. Hotspots, our hotspot is going to be your guest network, so they can access the internet, and DMZ we're not going to worry about today. Then we have external, and external is, again, out to the internet. And again, I'm not going to walk you through all these individually. I'm just going to go in now. We're going to create our first policy. So actually, before we create a policy, we need to do one thing first. We need to set up a network protocol or network object protocol. And this will simplify creating the rule. So let's go in and do that one first. And that's under profiles. And it's under, so I clicked on profiles over here on the left-hand side. And then we're going to go to, you have Ethernet ports, Wi-Fi speed limit, radius, and network objects. We want to be under network objects. That's where we want to create this. And now that we're under network objects, we're going to create a new one. And under, we can give it a name. So we're going to give it a name. We're going to call this HomeKit and Internet. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to let me create one thing that covers 3 ports. There are 2 ports that are used to access the internet and 1 to access HomeKit. So let's do those. So port number, the first port to access the internet is port 80. It's been that way for years, and we'll just go ahead and add it. So you put them all in separate entries. The next port we're going to do is 443, which also accesses the web. When you see HTTP, that is 80. When you see HTTPS, that is secure, which is 443. And then last but not least, the important one, 5353, is for your HomeKit stuff. So now we've added all 3 of those to this one rule called HomeKit and Internet, because those are the ports we need to access the HomeKit and Internet. And if there's some other port you need for this, you can go ahead and add it in, but those are the ones I need. So now I'm going to go ahead and add that object. So now we have one thing that refers to all 3 of those ports. So instead of every rule having to put those ports in one by one by one manually, you can create an object that has all the ports listed for anything that you're trying to do. Now we can go back to security. And now we can go in and create our first policy. We're going to set up 4 of these policies or rules. The first one, let's go ahead and create it, is, and by the way, everything is over here now on the side panel. So first, rule number 1, we need to, and I usually describe the name of the rule as to what it does. Allow IoT to HomeKit. So in other words, allow the IoT network to access HomeKit stuff. So now you just walk through it. So what is it? Which zone is it? Because remember, we're doing zones now. Is it internal, external, VPN, hotspot, DMZ? It's internal. It's an internal zone. It's a network. So we're going to do network. And then it's going to ask you to pick which network is it. It's the IoT network. Good. Save. So now the IoT network, we're going to Also specify. All right, so the IoT network is going to, not any port, we're going to do an object, because remember we created an object, and that object is called HomeKit and Internet. So that allows me to simply pick that instead of having to make 3 separate entries for that. And so now we're basically saying this is what we're trying to let connect. It's our IoT network on those specific ports. We're going to allow, so you have block, allow, and reject. We're going to allow, we're going to switch to internal zone, and we're going to go to network, and we're going to select our trusted network. So in other words, I want IoT network to allow those ports to connect to my internal network, my trusted network. Also, I only wanted to allow to touch it via a specific port. So there's one more thing I want to change here. A specific port, which is 5353. Because again, this has nothing to do with it connecting to the internet. I only want it to talk to the internal network via this one port. Now, I know we chose the object, which is internet and HomeKit, but that was just for simplicity. I could have gone in and just, instead of saying that, I could have said specific port, 5353 up there as well. It's your choice. Both will work. And if you wanted to actually make it more secure, you could go in and do just that. You could go back up here and you could say, you could do a very specific port and just do 5353. But I'm going to let it do all 3. All right, because I'm blocking it down here and saying, you know what, even though I've allowed it to use all 3 ports, but still only communicate with the internal network on 5353. All right, so now I'm going to add that policy. And once that policy is added, it now internal no longer says allow all. It shows that we have that one policy, allow IoT to HomeKit. All right, our next one, we're going to go in and we're going to create another policy that allows IoT devices to connect to the internet. So again, remember, this has to talk to the internet, which is internal to external, to be able to get updates and to be able to communicate with its app. So we're going to create another second policy. Remember, we're doing 4 of these. And the second policy name is going to be allow IoT devices to connect to the internet. Very specific name. All right, so same thing, internal, and we're going to do a specific network, select IoT, save. And the IoT network, we're going to allow, and we're going to simply say external, because that's the internet. So everything external. It can go out and talk to anything else outside of my house. I don't care what it does. That's fine. It can do that. And that's pretty much it. Basically, that's it. We add that rule. So now that one will show up under external, because that's allow IoT devices to connect to the internet. That's an external thing. So we have internal zones, you have external zones. And by the way, you can even create your own zones. We don't need to for this exercise, but just know that that's an option. All right. Now, the last one, and this is the one that kind of took me a while to figure out, is I would set this up and my IoT devices would be working, but I couldn't, on my trusted network, talk to an IoT device. I couldn't ping one. I couldn't do anything with it. And you may want that. You may not want anyone to be able to talk to a device on the IoT network, but I do. So I created a third rule to fix this problem, third policy. And that third policy is called allow trusted to IoT. So meaning let my trusted network talk to the IoT network. So for this one, I did, let's go here and let's, obviously we want internal network, and we want to select the trusted network in this case and save that. And we want to allow, once again, not block, allow. And we want it to talk to another internal network. We want it to talk to the IoT network. So once again, we'll select it and save it. Great. So far we've named it allow or trusted to talk to IoT. The internal network is trusted on any port. can talk to the destination internal network IoT on any port. I just want to make sure that's correct. On any port, yes. And that's it. So that's me as an administrator. I can talk to IoT devices on any port that I want. All right, so great. So we allow that. So now if we go back to the internal policies, that one's there as well. So allow IoT to HomeKit, allow trusted to IoT. Now the last rule is kind of the important one. It's the catch-all that says, I don't want my IoT devices to do anything else. I want to block any other non-authorized traffic. All right, so let's create one more rule. And this one we're going to call block other IoT traffic. Okay, so the source obviously is going to be the IoT network. Great. And we're going to choose, now in this case, you might say, well, we don't want to block everything. So we want to block basically everything except the internet and 5353, which is HomeKit. So this is where that object comes in that we created earlier again. We're going to select that object, but this time we're going to say this is a very cool option. We're going to choose that object, but we're going to say match the opposite port, meaning everything except those three. So everything except 80, 443, and 5353. Block. And that's the action. Right now it's already defaults to block. Destination is also going to be when it's trying to talk to my internal network, my trusted network. Boom. Done. So that's it. So that's basically saying, hey, I don't want the IoT network to do anything else outside of HomeKit, block it when it's trying to talk to my trusted network on any port. So just block it. Now, this is the catch-all. This is the saying, just in case someone hacks into the IoT network and tries to communicate with the trusted network on any other port, block it. Just drop that traffic. Don't do anything. Now, you might be asking also, what's the difference between block and reject? Block just simply drops it. Yep. Ignore, disconnect, hang up the phone. Reject says, hey, I'm rejecting this because blah, 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 you're not allowed. I don't need it to send anything back. Just drop the traffic. Don't even try. All right, so now we add that last policy. Okay, this all worked except I still couldn't talk to my IoT network from my internal network, my trusted network, and I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why isn't this working? Everything looks right. Why isn't this working? And then I remembered. Rules operate in a top-down order. So first rule, second rule, third rule, all the way down to the last rule. And if you have a rule that blocks something before your allow rule, that traffic will never make it to the allow rule. It'll just get dropped. So that's what was happening, is that I needed to move that block rule down below one of my allow rules so that it wouldn't just drop the traffic before it even got to the ones that were okay. And that was what was happening here. So you notice that when you're in a zone, you get the option, to reorder. So if I choose my internal zone, I can now reorder. And that's how you're going to move things around. So see, this is exactly what's happening here. That's exactly what happened to me. Block other IoT traffic before allow IoT traffic to HomeKit, return, before this, before that. So it was blocking before these important rules. So in order to make that not happen, we're going to simply move this down to here. So in other words, let this stuff happen, then block anything else, and then allow any other traffic. So this will still work because this has nothing to do with any of these rules. So allow all other traffic still works. But this was the key that I spent a couple hours trying to figure out why my rules weren't working or why my policies weren't working. And it was because this block was happening before the returns, and therefore it still was not allowing the traffic to talk back until I moved it down. All right, so now that I moved that down, we click done. And your firewall rules, policies, are set. Your IoT devices can talk to the internet. Your IoT devices can talk to your trusted network on port 5353 for HomeKit. Your trusted network, which is you, your humans in your home, can talk to those IoT devices if needed via an app or whatever. And if any other traffic comes through the IoT network, it can't get to your trusted network because all that traffic will just be dropped. Those are the 4 rules that it took me forever to get right and figure out, because I was missing the 5353 pieces and I was missing the IoT or the trusted network talking back to the IoT network. All right, so now we get to the important part, which is now we've created these VLANs. We have our networks set up, and now we need to connect all of this to our devices. And your devices connect to your network one of 2 ways, Wi-Fi or Ethernet. So we need to basically be able to put this into effect so that when a device connects either way, it gets the right policies. So for that, we're going to jump over to the last part of this, which is Wi-Fi. All right, so now the first thing we need to do is add a Wi-Fi network. And first we need to tell it what the Wi-Fi network is going to be. So here's the problem. I bet you already have one. I bet you already have the original Wi-Fi SSID that you created when you first set up your Unifi gear. And if you're like most of us, most likely that Wi-Fi SSID is the one you had before. It's the one from your previous setup. So that you could easily connect everything by just using the same network name and password, or Wi-Fi name and password. That's the easy route. We all did it. So let's just say that that network is called Terry White. And I'm going to go ahead and put in just a sample password here. Let's see if it'll take it. Let's do. Okay. So now I've got my my Wi-Fi hotspot in, and it's going to connect automatically to the trusted VLAN. So anything, in other words, anyone that connects to this Wi-Fi access point will be on the trusted VLAN if they connect to Terry White with this password. So let's add this Wi-Fi network. Now let me make sure. Again, here's the other thing too. So yes, I have all bands selected. It's not a hotspot for guest networks. There's even an enhanced IoT connectivity. This is interesting too. Limits Wi-Fi network to 2.4 gigahertz only with special compatibility settings recommended if you experience connectivity issue. See, they even have that set up for IoT, which we're going to get to in a minute. So I'm going to say yes. That's it. I don't need to do anything else. And no, I don't want to save that password. Okay. So now there is a SSID called Terry White on my using my trusted network, broadcasting on that one access point that I set up for this, using all the bands. Great. All right, next we want a guest. We want a guest network, right? So we're going to create another new Wi-Fi hotspot. And this one is going to be, again, you can call your guest network whatever you want. You can even call it Terry White if you want to, but probably wouldn't make sense to your guest. So we're going to call this one Terry White Guest, and we're going to give it a different password. Very important. Don't give your Wi-Fi access or networks the same password, because someone's going to try it. If they know one password, they're going to try it on the other network. So, all right, I gave it a different, and this one we're going to say this is for the guest network. All right, so manual. So let's go in and see what we want to do here. So it is we could say captive portal. So this means that, again, when a guest connects, you can go in and set the settings for this. So you can give them a nice little welcome page, and they can read whatever you wrote, and they can agree to rules and all that and hit connect. Or you can just turn it off, and this is just be for your guest network. Now, again, I don't really have to do anything else because it's limiting them already to only this one VLAN anyway. So again, we don't have to do anything. We can let them connect to all of those bands if they need to. And I would argue that you could probably turn off 2.4, because what guest device would be connecting at that speed? But you could leave on 2.4, because what your phones and your tablets and your laptops will do is, if they're too far away to connect at the higher speeds, they'll drop down to 2.4. So again, I'll leave it on for that. So again, no, I don't want to memorize that password. Okay, so now we have our second SSID. So now it gets into the ones for our IoT devices. So our guests will connect to Terry White guests with a different password, and they'll be limited to the guest VLAN, and they can't talk to anything else. Great. So now everyone else tells you to do this third one. I'm going to tell you to do a third one and a fourth one. I'll tell you why. So we're going to call this one Terry White IoT. And again, you'd call it whatever you want, and you give this one definitely a different password. So we're going to call this, we're going to make this one all right. This is going to be the IoT network. And again, we can say manual, and most likely you're going to do this. You're going to turn off those other speeds because 99% of these only connect to 2.4 anyway. So why give it the extra bands if it doesn't need it? And you could even turn on this feature to enhance the IoT. I don't know what that does. So you can enhance IoT connectivity. I might turn that on for my 2.4 gigahertz network just to see what happens. But I don't know other than what it says in the description. It just makes it easier for devices that have a hard time connecting with 2.4. So that's actually a good thing probably. And now we're going to go ahead and turn that on and say, yep, add the Wi-Fi network. Okay, so now we're set by most accounts because again, you've got an IoT network, you've got a guest network, and you've got your trusted network. But there's one more I'm going to have you create. And there's a reason for it. Let's go IoT. Let's do this. Create a new network. Terry White. IoT. IoT, not LOL. IoT 5. Why am I making a specific IoT networks for 5 gigahertz? Let me explain. And again, we'll just make this up. A, B, C, D, E, and some numbers, because I'm not going to have to remember this anyway. Again, it's going to connect to the IoT network. We're going to go to manual, and we're going to turn off 6, because we don't need 6. But I'm going to leave 2.4 on. Because here's what I found in the real world. In the real world, there are some devices that have a hard time connecting to your dual band network, your 2.4/5. So that's why everyone tells you create a separate 2.4 network, so that way all your troublesome 2.4 devices only connect to that network, and away they go. They're happy. But remember, I mentioned things like my Peloton bike and my car. I want those streaming at fastest speeds possible. I want the car getting this update fast as possible. So I'll connect those, and those, by the way, support 5 gigahertz. So why wouldn't I want those to connect at the 5 gigahertz speed to do whatever they do faster? So I believe in having both an IoT 2.4 network and an IoT 5 network. And you can argue and say, well, then the IoT 5 network doesn't need 2.4. And you're right, but if I do this, then theoretically I can connect all my IoT devices to this, and they'll pick whichever band they need. Or I could say, I'll only connect the 2.4 to the 2.4 ones. I'll connect everything else to this one. If it's too far away to get a good 5 gigahertz signal, it'll automatically drop down to 2.4. Those are my reasons. Okay, so now we're all set. We've got our 4 Wi-Fi hotspots. I keep wanting to call them hotspots. Our 4 Wi-Fi networks, our SSIDs, that broadcast on my only one access point. And if you have multiple access points, you can pick and choose which networks broadcast to which access points. And then you can see the bands break down here. So there's one IoT that's only 2.4, which is great for 2.4 stuff. And everything else is set. Okay. Now, this part is kind of self-explanatory. If you were to set up this new smart plug, you would want to set it up on the Terry White IoT network because it's 2.4. It only needs 2.4. It's never going to connect at 5. There's no reason to connect it to the 5 one. And as long as it works and connects fine on the 2.4, that's the one you'd put it on. However, In order for that to happen, you need to make sure your phone is also connected to that IoT network while you're setting this up. And here's why. HomeKit doesn't ask you when you set up a new device, what network do you want to connect it to? It just uses the one your phone's connected to. So if your phone is connected to your Terry White trusted SSID, this device is going to be connected to that SSID as well. And you're defeating the whole purpose. So now this new device is on the trusted network instead of the one you wanted it on. All right, now that begs a bigger problem or question. Remember I said most of us, we set up our Unifi gear with the same Wi-Fi name and password that we had before on whatever equipment we had before, just so everything would connect automatically. So that means that all your existing IoT devices are on your trusted SSID, and they need to be moved over to the IoT network, which is the whole reason you did all this in the first place. Unfortunately, moving devices, IoT devices, from one network to another is a pain in the ass. I'll just be honest, it is. Because unlike your laptop where you just go to the Wi-Fi menu and choose a different network and you're on, these, in many cases, probably in most cases, need to be factory reset and set up all over again to connect to a different network. Some will let you do it in the app, but those are far and few between. So especially the cheaper devices, you're going to end up having to factory reset it and do it all over again. And I think if you only have a few devices, that's not a big deal. I have over 100 IoT devices. It's a big deal. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm going to do them all in one day. So I've just basically set a goal while I'm home, when I'm not traveling, do 3 to 4 devices a day. So in a month or two, all the devices will be migrated over to the IoT network. I've gone for years with them not being on the IoT network. So it's not an urgent thing that it has to happen overnight. And eventually I'll get there. I'll have all the IoT devices on the network. Now, you might be wondering about like devices connected to Ethernet. And before we get to Ethernet, let me explain one more thing here. So you also have a choice. Like I said, if you walked into this and everything's already on one SSID, it might be easier just to switch that SSID to be the IoT network. And then move all your fewer devices that are trusted over to a new network. That's the trusted network. So I would rename this Terry White one IoT, and then I would switch it from trusted to the IoT network. When everything reconnects, it will be reconnected to the IoT network. I don't have to reconfigure any devices. But I would have to reconfigure or move trusted devices over to the new trusted network that I'd have to set up. So I weighed the pros and cons of doing that to my existing network versus moving everything. And it was better for me to move everything. For you, it might just be easier to switch your existing network over to be an IoT network, set up a new trusted network that you move your Mac, your iPad, your phone over, and all your trusted devices over to it, because you have fewer of those probably than you have IoT devices. So when you have an Ethernet-based device, it's not on Wi-Fi. My Peloton bike is not on Wi-Fi. It's connected via Ethernet. It has a USB port in the back, USB-C port. I put an adapter on it, plugged it in Ethernet. So it's never going to be on the IoT network because it's never connected to Wi-Fi. So on those devices, if you have a Unifi switch, or I guess it might work with other managed switches, but definitely Unifi switch, you can assign each Ethernet port to be whatever VLAN you want it to be on. So for example, I'm on the UG or the Unifi Cloud Gateway Max. I'm going to go to the port manager here. And so there's the internet and there's my one access point. And let's say I'm going to plug in that Peloton bike on port number 2. Then on port number 2, I would just switch it from the trusted network to the IoT network and apply. That's it. Any device I plug into port number 2 will automatically be on the IoT network. So all your Ethernet devices are even easier because you don't have to do anything with the device. You just have to go into your switch and figure out which port it's plugged into and switch that port to be on the IoT VLAN. Done. Those are easy. And you might have to reboot the device so it takes into account the new network settings. But that's it. Reboot versus reconfigure. Those Ethernet devices are a dream. Those are easier to set up because you do it at the port level, not at the device level. But Wi-Fi devices, you'll need to connect to your IoT network to set up new IoT devices, and then set it up to your trusted SSID for day-to-day work. When you're setting up your new IoT devices with your phone, your iPhone, and you switch to that IoT network like I told you have to do before you set this device up, there's also something called auto join. And by default, auto join gets turned on for every network you connect to. So next time you come home, it auto joins that network it's supposed to. You want to turn off auto join, number one, for networks you don't want it to connect to automatically, like IoT. But during setup of an IoT device, you want to turn it to auto join the IoT network and turn off auto join your trusted Wi-Fi network, whatever that is called, so that while you're setting up this device, it connects to the device, pulls your Wi-Fi information from your phone, puts it in this device. Sometimes it needs to go back and forth. And if it is in that process of going back and forth, but your phone is now reconnected to your trusted network, it's going to screw up the setup process. So I've learned that the hard way. Set auto join while you're adding new devices to the IoT network. You can turn it back off and switch auto join back on for your regular network once this device is set up in HomeKit and set up and working. All right, now, what about your hubs, your Apple TVs, your HomePods, which network should those be on? And I look at Apple TV and HomePod as trusted devices. I put them on my trusted network. You can argue with me. You could say, no, those should be on the IoT network, and I won't say you're wrong. I just trust them, so I put them on my trusted network. There's certainly, if you want to be more secure, you'd put them on your IoT network as well. It's arguably either way. I trust the Apple Home devices to be on my trusted network. I don't trust third-party devices to be on my trusted network. You do you, whichever one you think is best for you. Hopefully this works well for you. It's been working well for me. I've had this set up now for over a week. Had no connectivity issues. I move a few devices over every day, and everything just works. So with that said, I'm going to say cheers, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'll leave some links to some videos up here as well if you might want to catch like my network tour. Cheers. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye, everybody.